All righty. So we have a double Torah portion this week. And the Torah portions are called Tazria and Metzora. And this begins in Leviticus chapter 12, verse 1. And with both portions combined, it goes all the way over to chapter 15, verse 33. And of course, these the things that are dealt with in these particular Torah portions are not, it doesn't make the best table topic. It's a little, can be graphic a little bit, And yet we're going to try to find a way to take the concepts and principles that are in these Torah portions and apply it to our lives as families and as an assembly. So we're going to begin to read in Leviticus chapter 12, verse 1. It said, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a woman has conceived," and that word is Tazria, "if a woman has conceived and born a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. As in the days of her customary impurity, she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall then continue in the blood of her purification 33 days. She shall not touch any hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are fulfilled." So prior to these portions, we had a Torah portion that detailed laws pertaining to the priest and the things that were considered to be holy. And as we talked about last week, things that pertain to food and those animals that go into the body, those things that are permissible to go into the body. So now the Torah is going to turn its attention to laws of purification pertaining to those things that emanate from the body. And so there's a reminder here, I want to kind of build on last week. What goes in is not necessarily as offensive as what comes out. Now, I better add a little to that so our minds don't linger too long on that idea. But the idea I had, and this is what I brought out last week, and by the way, some people thought I was saying things that I was not. But I made the point that if we get a steady diet of CNN and Fox and MSNBC and Facebook and Twitter and all these things, if we get a steady diet of that, that's what's going to come out. What goes in is what's going to come out. That is not to be misinterpreted as I have a problem with people joining us and watching the live stream on Facebook and YouTube. I mean, how stupid of that would that be of me to do that when we have so many people watching us on YouTube and Facebook? So that was not what I was saying. But what I am saying is what we feed ourselves, that's what we're going to disperse to everybody else as well. So Matthew chapter 15, verse 17, Yeshua said this, "Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? But those things which proceed out of the mouth comes from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man." So, yes, what goes in, if it's unclean, can affect us outwardly. But the point of all of that was, it's that those things that are inward will be manifest outwardly. And so if those things that are manifest outwardly are unclean and corrosive and corruptive and on and on and on, then what is the remedy? To take care of the heart condition, to take care of what is on the inside, to take care of and to filter what goes into my mind, my heart, my spirit, and even, yes, my belly. Because the physical will reflect the spiritual, and the spiritual will reflect the physical. In Genesis chapter 6, verses 11 and 12, the Bible tells us that the earth was corrupt in the days of Noah. And if you read it very carefully, what you conclude, or can conclude, is that the earth was corrupt because men had corrupted themselves. They didn't just corrupt the earth, they were corrupting themselves. And their personal corruption then was manifest in the very earth itself. So things that manifest in the physical world are often the result of things that are going on in the spiritual world, emphasizing that what is present in us as an individual, as a congregation, as a nation, what is present in us internally will eventually manifest outwardly. And typically, when those kinds of things manifest, it's not so pretty, which is why perhaps the Father sees fit to not only address these physical things that people have to deal with, but perhaps it's to make a larger point, that these things, when they do manifest, they're not pretty, and they have to be dealt with. Even something as wonderful as giving birth to a son, which is how this Torah portion begins. Even something as beautiful as that, as wonderful as that, as joyous as that, giving birth to something as precious as a child can produce something unclean. So I want you to take that idea that's expressed in the Torah portion and then consider that in terms of what God is doing in the earth. In other words, the things that he is orchestrating, the events that he is bringing together. You know why these things are happening? You know why the Bible calls them birth pangs? Because he's getting ready to birth something. So take the idea that as something is giving, as birth is happening, even that produces things that are unclean. And the Father is causing things to come together so that something can be birthed. So we're going to go to Romans chapter 8 and verse 18. Paul says, I consider that the sufferings of the present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. And I have to kind of interject this. If something is going to be revealed, it must first be concealed. For the child to come into this world, you know, that little baby right now is developing in Jessica's womb. And if it's a he or a she, we don't know yet, but we know that it's in there and it's developing and we can't see it. But one day, she's going to bring that little baby in here and mom and dad are going to present he or she to the whole congregation for all to see. But between now and then, you got to go through some stuff. Carson, you got to go through some stuff, pal. You are going to learn what it means, for better or worse. It's going to be fun. So there are these birth pangs. So something that is concealed must be revealed, and it has to go through this process. And he continues, for the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. And so as the earth and the creation is producing these birth pangs, how is it most often manifest and expressed for us to see? In things that aren't so pretty, in things that aren't so desirable. And yet it's just part of the process. For something to be birthed, the process produces these things and brings to the surface these things that are not so pretty. So if the earth is producing birth pangs so that the sons of God are revealed, then in the process we should expect that unclean things will materialize as well. And we would presume in this context that those unclean things would be produced by the world that groans. But I also want you to consider this concept on a more personal level. For instance, if we believe that God is birthing something in and through this assembly called Jacob's tent, and any other assembly that he has conceived and breathed upon and is raising up, then it is, unfortunately, just a part of the process that unclean and not so desirable things will come to the surface. And so I want to talk to you about a few things that aren't really that pleasant to talk about. And that is that, number one, the greatest threat to any fellowship is not so much the forces that are without. It's those things that can happen from within. It is the adversary's greatest ploy to corrupt what God is doing from within what God is doing, and among those that God is working in and through. That is why, one of the reasons anyway, Yeshua gave us that parable about the wheat and the tares. The tares are these things that are not fruitful, they're not conducive to life, but they're not content to stay in their own field. The adversary's nature is aggressive. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy. And when we can recognize him coming at us from without, that's one thing. And don't deny that there are those kinds of situations, but that's not how he likes to work the most. He likes to sow the tare inside the wheat. And so his greatest ploy is to try to corrupt what God is doing from within. And that's why, and we've said this from the very beginning, that's why all of us have to be very diligent to guard against this, to be on guard for this, to know that he's going to try it. Not that he might, he is going to try it. He is going to make that attempt. And that is why we have to stay on guard, not just for the other guy, but for this guy. Because my greatest enemy is the guy I see in the mirror every morning. And so don't think that I can't fall victim to this and can't be persuaded to give into self and be the tare in the midst of the wheat, because I can. And when we start thinking of ourselves, no, I would never do that, then we've just set ourselves up to be a potential candidate. So let's be very, very diligent to keep guard. First, to guard this heart, this mind, this spirit, and what goes in, and what we allow to go out. So as individuals, we have to continually look to our Father to be cleansed inwardly. David said, purge me with hyssop and I will be clean. Clean my inward parts, he was saying, the inner man. Because if you clean the inside of the cup, then what's going to happen? That's going to be expressed and manifest on the outside of the cup. And let us not allow our weaknesses, mine, yours, ours, let's not allow the adversary to use our weaknesses against us. Because if we do, then this baby that he's wanting to birth here might be aborted. And how many of us want that to happen? None of us do. But all of us have the responsibility. As I've said many times, it starts here with me and with Beth, but it doesn't end with us. It includes all of us. When I was kind of putting these thoughts together, my mind went back to when Brandon was being born and the whole Lamaze thing, and all of that stuff. And my job as coach was to help my wife keep her focal point, stay focused. And if I recall correctly, there was some kind of painting or picture on the wall in the hospital. And so we're going to use that as our focal point. And she would try to stay focused on it. But sometimes those contractions and those birth pangs just got so intense that didn't become the focal point. I became the focal point. Keep your focus, honey. Don't touch me. I'm exaggerating a little. No. But no, it wasn't quite that bad. But my point is that it was hard. It was hard for her to do that. And I understand that. And it's hard for us to stay focused when we're feeling all this pressure and the intensity of the attack and what's going on inwardly in our family or what's going on in the world, and all these things are weighing on us and we're feeling that pressure. It's hard to stay focused, but it's necessary to stay focused. Romans chapter 15. When we lose our focus of what the Father has called us to, and we lose focus of the one who can lead us through that, And it's easy for us to get our focus on everybody else, and usually what's wrong with them. Romans 15, verse 1. We then who are strong ought to bear with the scruples or the failings of the weak, and not to please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, leading to edification. For even the Messiah did not please himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. So those who reproached God, their reproaches fell on him, speaking of the Messiah. For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, so that we can learn from example, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. If this guy endured it and overcame, then through the Messiah and by his Spirit, I can overcome. We can overcome. It gives us hope. It gives us encouragement. Now may the God of patience and comfort grant you to be like-minded toward one another, according to Messiah Yeshua, that you may with one mind and one mouth glorify the God and Father of our Lord Yeshua, the Messiah. So I want to summarize this the way I understand it. Those who are more mature should strive to endure the issues that arise with the immature. We're always going to have in a congregation, a family, what have you, we're always going to have those who are a little bit more mature in some areas, and we're always going to have people coming in that are new or, they're trying to adjust or what have you, and in some ways might be more or less mature than us. And so what Paul is encouraging us to do is to acknowledge, look, those who are a little less mature than you are probably going to make some mistakes. And like you haven't. And so if you consider yourself to be mature in the faith, then understand that it is incumbent upon us for the sake of the body at large to not condone or endorse bad behavior, but to bear. And when we go to our neighbor, let it be for his good. Let's edify. So all of these things are something that in every congregation we're going to be faced with. We have been, we are, and we will be. That's just the way of it. Until we see him face to face and we're made like him, we're going to have to struggle with this thing called flesh. So again, this is not to endorse weaknesses, but as the more mature, we are to be a proper example to those who are weaker. And the idea here is not that they would continue in their weakness, but that they would learn from you who are more mature, and they would grow, and they would become mature, and they would be less weak in that area and grow in whatever area the Father is wanting to do some things in their life with. So that's what we face as a congregation every day. And that's something we need to keep focused on, that it is for the benefit of the body that those who are mature learn to bear with the failings and the weaknesses of those who are less mature. Again, I want to stress this, not to endorse weakness, not to encourage failing, but to encourage overcoming. So let's go to an even more personal level. If God is wanting to birth something in me, or if God is wanting to birth something in you as an individual, then it is very likely that some unclean things will come to the surface. Some of those things might surprise even us. I've been surprised by some of the things that I've thought, said, done, and thought, where did that come from? Or why did I say that? That happened just the other day. Somebody did something stupid on the highway, and I'm like, you nah. And then I later thought, why did I say that? Where did that come from? So again, if the idea is something as glorious as a child being born simultaneously produces something that is considered unclean and unsightly, then we can only guess, we can only conclude that as he's birthing something in us as people, as an individual, then it is part of the process that these unclean things, these things that are in there, are going to come to the surface. Can you receive that? Some of it may surprise us, but then there are those things that we know are there, because we know that we've struggled with those things. And if we're a little more agreeable with ourselves to just kind of push it aside or put it on the back burner, then we've probably had people in our lives that are close to us to point out that thing that we have a weakness with, or that we struggle with, or that we've tripped over. You know, don't look at her, guys. Don't look at her. But no, in all seriousness, we have those people close to us that the Father has put in our lives to kind of be a mirror of who and what we are. And so there are those things that we know good and well that we've struggled with, and we've just been at times content to lay them aside and put them on the back burner. And then there's those people in our lives that he uses to remind us, this is something you keep tripping up over. This is something you keep having a struggle with. So I want to suggest something to you. And I don't want to come across as preaching at you. I want to come across as sharing with you. Because everything I'm saying pertains to me, starts with me, addresses me, deals with me. But if people close to you are continually having to point out something about you that isn't so attractive, it might be time to listen. It might be the time for you to sit back and quit being defensive and think, maybe the Father's trying to speak to me. Maybe there's something that is time that I need to take action on. In fact, not just listen, but to embrace, to internalize, go to the Father with it, and if need be, take action. It's not enough to say, well, I've always been like that. That's the way God made me. It may not be the way he made you. It may be the way you made yourself. And again, I'm talking to me, okay? My point is, it's not enough to use those excuses that we've used in times past. If we know there is a tendency to be weak in a particular area, it's not enough to say, oh, I'm sorry. It has to be that I do something about it. And especially considering the season that we're coming into as his people. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, not just the ones that are convenient to get rid of, but the ones that are inconvenient to get rid of as well. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. Now, there's a lot of opinion about what the writer means here. Is it just the sin nature at large? Well, the sin nature was something I was delivered of when I was born again. So I'm of the view, and this is Bill's opinion, that the writer of Hebrews is well acquainted with the idea that there are those things in our life that we continually, time after time, seem to trip up over. Same thing. This is not an issue. That's not an issue. That is not an issue. But doggone it, it seems like there are seasons in my life when I keep going back to that same thing and tripping over it. Or is Bill the only one? Those are the things that we come back to him and say, please forgive me of this again. So it is time, he says, to lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Yeshua, because there's our focal point. Looking unto Yeshua, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin. In other words, you haven't gone nearly as far as he did in this war against sin and that corrupt nature. Because none of us, to the degree he has anyway, has shed blood over this. So there's the standard. And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My sons, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and he scourges every son he receives. My dad would put it this way: it's going to hurt me more, it's going to hurt you. I'm like, you're lying. But as you get older and you have children, no parent loves to do that. No parent enjoys having to discipline their children. But there's a reason we do that. Because we love them. Because we want them to grow. We want them to mature. We want them to be the man and the woman that God has intended for them to be. And so it is our responsibility, and it's one of those chores that we should not take lightly and we should not dismiss just because culture says it should be done a certain way. We should do what our Father has instructed us to do. That's part of the process of something being birthed. That young man, that young woman becoming the man and the woman that God has intended them to be, part of the process is laid before our feet as parents and grandparents to train them and sometimes, yes, rebuke them. Because our Father chastens those that he loves. So there is a season that is given to us, I believe, and this is something that is alluded to in the book of Revelation when Messiah was talking to one of the congregations there. But there is a season that is given to us in order that we might address these unsightly things that come bubbling to the surface. But if we refuse, if we dismiss it, if we discard it, ignore it, then there comes a time when God deals with it. And I don't like those times. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 31, for if we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged. Now, the context of this, he's talking about those who come and partake of the Lord's table. But the concept remains the same for every issue, really. If we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord that we may not be condemned with the world. So why does he step in and do things and rebuke us and chasten us? Because he doesn't want us to be condemned with the world. Because he loves us. He cares about us. So in an effort to preclude that, and I would even add to that the scorn of the world, because every time, and I'm not wanting to infer in any way that anything like this is going on in Jacob's tent. I'm just going to use this as an example. Anytime a high-profile assembly doesn't deal with their stuff, and the Father has to step in and deal with it, how does the world respond? Look at them. And whose name is defamed? Whose name is profaned in that? Okay? So it is in not only our interest, but it's about his reputation that he has to, at times, unfortunately, step in and deal with things. But Paul's point here is, if we would do that of our own volition, if we would do that voluntarily, he wouldn't have to. So what's the best course of action here? As he brings these things to our attention, let's address them. Let's deal with them so that we don't have to go through all of those other kinds of things. But these issues, they do come to the surface. So as the contractions intensify and the child is being birthed, these unclean things will begin to materialize, because the squeezing that's going on as that child is being born, it's not only producing a baby, but it's producing some pretty unsightly manifestations. I'll just use that word. You know, when Nathan, our number 2, was born, and Beth knew that she was going to have a C-section, we went in and they put this little curtain. I don't know what you would actually call it. It was a little divider, and it had a little curtain, and they put it, right here. And so I was sitting at her head, and all the action was down there. you know, and they had given her an epidural. Is that how you say it? Am I in trouble? Okay, you just had this look on your face. Y'all pause just a moment. I'll be right back with you. Okay, I just want this is okay? All right. They gave her an epidural. And after they started doing everything, and I'm sitting on this side because there's just things I don't want to see. I'll just put it that way. So I'm sitting over here and talking to her, and she's like, "Bill, I don't think it's working. I don't think the epidural's working. I can feel what's going on." I'm like, so make sure that they know I can feel, and I don't tell them before they get started. And I did like that, and I said, "That's working." I saw all kind of things going on there. I ain't cut out for this. But you understand the point I'm trying to make here? It's something as glorious as that child being born. And that overshadowed everything else. Because Nathan means a gift. And he was our gift. But it was the process produced all this other. So that's what goes on. That's the concept here. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't be surprised if and when that happens. We should expect that it would. But if we know it's going to happen tomorrow, then let's prepare today for what we need to be as a people to address those things in the proper way, in a way that honors him, in a way that it edifies, in a way that exhorts, in a way that builds and matures and grows us in love for one another and for him. So now this concept I'm talking about now is amplified by what the Bible calls zorat. And if you'll show everybody this Hebrew word, we've talked about this several times before, but the word zorat, it's translated typically as leprosy. And I'm not going to get into biblical leprosy and compare to what we know as leprosy today. You probably, most of you anyway, probably already aware that the biblical zorat or leprosy is not the leprosy that what we call leprosy today. But the word zorat comes from a root word that means to erupt, to project out. It's something that is inside, and like a volcano, it builds up and then it erupts and is manifest on the outside. So the zorat in the Bible was the eruption that took place in the person who contracted this ailment. There's another Hebrew word I want you to see, and that is zarah. This is a related word. And zarah means to squeeze. It's a word that we get zar from, and it's a word that means pressure. It can be heat. These kinds of things that are related to the idea of pressure and heat and friction, things that squeeze. And when the pressure or the squeezing occurs, that's what causes what's on the inside to project outwardly. So whether it is the contractions that mom has to endure when she's giving birth, those contractions are squeezing, creating that pressure, if you can use that word, and then that baby is being projected out or forced out of the birth canal. But then sometimes, in this particular case, it is to indicate that there's something on the inside of this person that needs to come out. And the reason it needs to come out is not just so that everybody can see it and point fingers. It needs to come out so that it can be dealt with and so that it can be removed from this person's life or from that family's life or from that congregation's life. So in this case, what needs to be removed? Let me show you the next Hebrew word. At the heart of the word zorat is the word ra, evil or wickedness. And so those things that are wicked, those things that are evil, need to be removed from that person's life. And so the pressure builds and this eruption takes place and it's manifest outwardly. In the Bible, it's talking about a skin condition, but what I'm talking about goes far beyond a skin condition. These things that are manifest outwardly, and again, not so everybody can sit back, look at what they did or look at what they are. It's so that these things can be addressed, dealt with, and these things removed from that person's life. What is to be removed? That evil thing that was in them. Now, you know, when we use the word evil or wicked, our mind usually immediately goes to things that are blatantly, obviously wicked. You know, abortion, that's wicked. Devil worship, that's wicked. Some of these other things that we see going on in the world, obviously, blatantly wicked. But anything that's not serving his purpose, anything that's going against his will, by definition, that's wicked. If my people, which are called by my name, if they would humble themselves, seek my face and pray and turn from their wicked ways. Anything that is contrary to his will, technically speaking, is wicked. And so these inclinations we have, these attitudes we have, including Bill, these things are subjected to pressure, so that they can come to the surface and be removed from our lives if we follow the pattern and follow the process the way we're supposed to. I do believe something is being birthed here. And I can tell you personally that in the process, it's causing things that are in me to come to the surface, and those things need to be removed. It will manifest that way if he is birthing something. So the zorat in the Bible was to indicate that God was putting pressure on this person in order to purge the evil from their heart. In other words, it was something that was evidence of what was going on inside. So then, I want you to ask yourself this question, and you don't have to answer it out loud. I would prefer that you do not answer it out loud. But ask yourself this: what comes out of you when pressure is applied? What comes out of you when pressure is applied in certain things? Those might be the things that those close to you have been mentioning to you. Those might be the things that the Father has been dealing with you about. Now, the rabbinic view of zorat, or what caused it, and I want to underscore that word, rabbinic view. Doesn't mean it's the only view, doesn't mean it's the authoritative view, it's just a view. But nevertheless, they believe that that zorat was the result of slander. Zorat, the word, is a contraction of this Hebrew phrase, come on, Bill. Metzora. Metzora, one who spreads evil speech. So zarat, Metzora. So one who spreads evil speech, they believe that this is what was going on and why you would have people who would be afflicted with this thing called zarat. Now, Jewish commentary connects that thought to an incident that involved Miriam. I want to read to you from Numbers chapter 12, beginning in verse 1. Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. And so they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out you three to the tabernacle of meeting. So the three came out. As a child, some of the most frightening words I ever heard were, all three of my names. I'm not going to tell you what they are. But when mom called you by your first name and your middle name and your last name, you knew something was amiss. And that's when I started looking at the mulberry tree, because I knew, I'll see in a little bit, I'm going to have to come pull a limb off of you in just a second. I have this feeling. Because some of you remember the switch, right? Some of our younger folks don't know what a switch is. It's the limb off a tree that they would discipline you with because they love you. So the idea was, and just so you'll know where some of us are coming from, when you were sent out to get your own switch, this was an art. It had to be big enough that it doesn't break on the first two, but not so big that it's going to break your spine. It had to break at just the right place in this process so she would feel satisfied and you would live. So when I read this, I can't help but think of a parent saying, "Get in here. I got to talk to you about something." Father doesn't have that kind of accent, I know. We'll skip on down to verse 9. So the anger of the Lord was aroused against them, and he departed. And when the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, suddenly Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. Then Aaron turned toward Miriam. There she was, a leper. And that word is Metzora. She had this zarat, that which is described for us in this Torah portion. So that's, I think, pretty good evidence for the idea that this might be related to the slander and gossip. And if that's the truth, then consider just how destructive slander and gossip is. It's a cancerous cell, and it affects the entire community. Thus, the one who slanders and gossips, in Judaism anyway, is regarded as a moral leper, a Metzora, the name of one of our Torah portions. And allowing it to remain in the community, the Metzora had to be put outside of the community. Not because it was a contagious disease as far as the skin disease. It's what is in the person's heart. That's what's contagious. That's what can infect and affect the entire community because it threatens the entire body. So in this particular case, in the Torah portion, isolation was called for. But the isolation was intended not to cast that person off and forget about him. The isolation was intended to provoke that person in their isolation to be provoked to get their heart right, to turn back wholeheartedly to God. Now, where Miriam is concerned, she was placed outside the camp for 7 days. And by the way, because Moses interceded for her. But here's the question. Why is she afflicted with the Zorat and Aaron is not? And there's a lot of different commentary on this, and you can take it for what it's worth, but there's reason to believe that she may have instigated it. And then Aaron went along with it. Now, I have no problem with believing that because Aaron can easily be swayed, it would seem. Moses, they brought the gold to me, I threw it into the fire, and poof, out jumped this golden calf. That's all I know. It seems that Aaron is easily persuaded. Now, in Judaism, he's regarded as being a peacemaker. He's just wanting everybody to be happy, everybody to be good, and everybody to be okay. But you can go too far with that. It's a great thing to be a peacemaker, but let's make certain that as we're making peace, that we're not encouraging something that's going to cause a war like this did. Anyway, she is afflicted. Aaron turns to Moses, said, don't hold, we sinned, we messed up, forgive us, etc. Don't lay this on her. And then Moses intercedes on her behalf. The issue had something to do with Moses' wife. It says that she was an Ethiopian. So there was something going on there. And there are different traditions about what it was, but I'm going to boil it down for you. It was really, they were making issue of decisions that Moses had made. They were questioning his choices and decisions that he had made, in particular where his wife was concerned. And according to the same tradition, when Miriam goes to say something, she says it to Aaron, not to Moses. It's also inferred anyway that there is an apparent jealousy of the position that Moses was in, and there were questions about the methods. Now, Miriam was family. This wasn't an outsider. She was his oldest or older sister. And as such, she is the one who had watched over him when he was in that little basket floating down the Nile. There are traditions that say that she was the one who prophesied that he would be born. She was the one that when she saw the daughter of Pharaoh taking her baby brother from the water, she approached the daughter of Pharaoh and said, I know somebody who can take care of that baby. She's the one that when the children of Israel come up out of the sea, she and ladies took some tambourines and they started singing and they started dancing, they started celebrating. And there in Jewish tradition, there's this concept called Miriam's well, and how that throughout the wilderness experience when God gave water to the children of Israel, it was because of the merit of Miriam. My point here is that she did many wonderful things that benefited Moses and that benefited all of God's people. But those good things did not authorize her to do what she did where Moses was concerned. And what good things others had to say about her, that's one thing. But God took issue with what she said about Moses. And so because of the consequence of her choice and Aaron's, the people were delayed in moving on. So my point here is, every assembly knows that sooner or later things happen. And we don't want them to. We want to avoid those things. In fact, that's why I'm talking about this. Not because I think something's going on. It's because this Torah portion, this is what I felt like the Father spoke to me. Bill, you know these things are going to pop up. You better be prepared to deal with them, and in the right way. Would you agree? Okay. So then, people's choices, when they make wrong choices, doesn't just affect them. It can affect everybody. And it can impede the movement of God's people. Now think about that. I've been thinking about it a lot. What was the sin that was committed? It was, in a sense, questioning God's judgment. Why does Moses get to, decide all this? Why is it that Moses prophesied? Hadn't the Father prophesied through all of us? Isn't he using all of us? That's basically what they were saying, which, if you think about it, is essentially the same thing that Korah said later. It's the same basic argument. The wording might be a little different, but it's the same argument. Because in Numbers chapter 16, when you read about the rebellion of Korah, they said, all of the congregation is holy. Why are you so exalted, Moses? Who made you chief? Well, the answer to the question was, he did. So Korah and Dathan and Abiram and these 250 notable men that led this rebellion were in effect challenging God's decisions. So I want to say something that is rather unpleasant, but I think it's necessary. I'm not aware of any congregation, at least those that I know about, that I've been involved with, that have not had some kind of scenario like this to deal with. And if you know that congregation, we need to talk to them. The one that hasn't had anything like that go on, we need to talk to them. All right? But I'm not aware of any congregation that hasn't had that kind of a scenario arise in some way or the other. That doesn't mean that every congregation fails or every congregation splits. It just means that this is part of the birthing process. There's always going to be somebody who thinks they can do it better. Somebody thinks they need to be in charge of that. They need to be in charge of this. There are always going to be people who are not content to function in their purpose. They want to function in somebody else's. But to be fair, it isn't always a Korah. Sometimes it's a Saul. Sometimes it's a leader who allows pride to grip their heart. And he doesn't lead the people properly. He doesn't treat them as the flock that's been entrusted to him to shepherd. He treats them otherwise. And unfortunately, when that happens, the people aren't led righteously. And then they follow suit. And it begins to affect everybody. So these things happen. But whether it's the former scenario, whether it's the latter scenario, the end result is not good for anybody. It affects that person and it affects others. So what's my point here? It's critical that we pay not just lip service to this, but that we genuinely, diligently, consistently guard our hearts against these kinds of things. If we know that there is a weakness in us, then let's not be content to live with it. Let's be provoked to deal with it. Don't just say, oh, this is the way God made me. That's just the way I am. Well, it may not be the way you need to be. It may not be the way I need to be. It may not be the way we as an assembly need to be. Because just like that little baby that's forming in Jessica's womb right now, it has not yet developed into what it will be. It's going through the process. And you and I in this congregation, we are going through the process. And what we are today is not what he intends us to be. Right? What we consider as our greatest strength is potentially our greatest weakness. That thing that you consider to be a strong characteristic, something that has been useful in your life, something that has been put to use to help others in their lives, that you consider yourself to be strong in, that maybe even at times you've prided yourself on, also has the potential to be your Achilles heel. So just as our strengths can help us and serve others, our weaknesses, if they are indulged and if they are exploited by our enemy, can hurt us and can hurt others as well. So the ox in the field, that's good. The ox in the china shop, not good. Right? And because once those very fragile and very precious things are broken, it's really difficult to put them back together again. And there are always going to be those reminders that they were broken. It behooves us to keep that in mind, and especially as we're dealing with one another, remembering that we who are mature are supposed to bear these failings of those who are weaker. And as we deal with one another, remember your critical words could be the blow that opens that crack back up. Because we all, every one of us, I'm sure, bear those scars. Every one of us. That's one of the things that I think the Father is wanting to do in our little congregation, is assemble those vessels that have been broken and hurt and shattered and bruised and scarred, and put them back together again in an assembly with people that will love them, that will care for them, that will consider them, that will help them to grow and to mature and be the people that he's called us all to be. I don't want us to fail in that. I want us to continue to be that kind of a fellowship. So let's keep these things in mind. Our strengths were given to us for a purpose, but we need to recognize that there are certain situations where those strengths need to be tempered. Because again, the ox in the field, that's good. The ox in the china shop, not so good. You know what? When a pig is serving its purpose, that's good. It's just that when we put it to use for other things, like centerpiece on a dinner table, that's when it becomes unclean. If we see these weaknesses in others, not just ourselves, but when we see these weaknesses in others, we are compelled to address them. But how? In love. And it would probably help if you had a relationship with them. They don't know you from Adam's house cat, and you say, I see this in you, and I think I need to tell this. You know what I'm going to do when you do that? I'm going to turn you off. But now if we have a relationship, we have a rapport, and you come to me, or I come to you, then we should take the time to listen to maybe my brother, maybe my sister's trying to help me, not condemn me. It's in our best interest as a whole to provoke each other to be better people. Here's what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. So then, because he is one, likewise we are challenged to be one. One heart, one mind, one soul, which means that we have to bear one another in our weaknesses and our frailties and our failings. It has always been disgusting to me to see how God's people respond when one of God's people fail. By and large, you know what I mean. That's not righteousness. That's self-righteousness. Let's not be those kinds of people. And again, I don't want anybody to infer in this that I'm saying that's what we are. I'm just was alerted that, okay, this is what happens. This is the process. It is not if it will, it will. It will try to arise. There will be these things that come to the surface. And we need to be prepared in the birthing process as mature people to address these things the way they need to be addressed, with the idea of restoration, maturing, growing, and coming together as one people. So, because we are to be one heart, one mind, one soul, one people, because he is one, there are certain practices that we must not allow to be present in our assembly. So I'm still in Ephesians 4, but I've got to go to verse 25. Therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Now, I feel that it's a given that at some point in time we're going to be angry with one another for this reason or that reason. I've been married to her for over 35 years. She gets mad at me. It's a shocker, I know. Surprise, surprise. And I get mad at her. But after 35 plus years, we've learned that there are certain ways to address it, certain ways that you do not. I don't go pushing her buttons. Lord knows I don't go pushing her buttons. And she tries not to push mine. So we understand that there is a way to deal, a right way to deal with anger. Anger is something, it's just going to be there. And it is part of that relationship that we have with one another. We are at times going to rub one another the wrong way. That doesn't mean that that's our sign to leave. It's our sign to grow, to mature. Because just as husband and wife are in covenant with one another, because we are one in Messiah, we are in covenant with one another in that way as well. We are partakers of the covenants of promise, all of us. And as such, we have an obligation and responsibility to one another that when you anger me or I anger you, that there is a right way to deal with it. And so again, I want to stress this. Just because you get angry with somebody doesn't mean it's time for you to leave. It may be time for you and that other person to grow, to mature, to do the righteous thing, not the self-righteous thing. When that happens, it's probably not the best idea to confront them when you're angry. I say this a lot, but I mean it. Decisions made, words spoken when I'm angry, I've never thought about it the next day and thought, that was the wisest thing I've ever done. It's usually, that was stupid. Why did you do that? Or why did you say that? Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. Because when we allow things to stew, we're giving the adversary an opportunity to exploit our weaknesses to the detriment of the body. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. In other words, be a giver, not a taker. Let's be a congregation of givers, not takers. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Here's Bill's translation of that. Don't be critical of one another, and especially don't be critical of someone to another. In other words, don't go to that other person and criticize that guy, because that's not good. To the contrary, what we should all be are encouragers. When we discourage, what do? We take courage away. When we encourage, what do? We give them courage. Okay? So let's be encouragers, even if that person is doing things in a way that drives you insane. There are things that I do that drive Brandon insane, and vice versa. And we butt heads and we get angry and we, and all this kind of stuff. But he knows that I love him and I know that he loves me. And so we work it out. And, at the appropriate time, I encourage him. He encourages me. Sometimes he pushes me a little bit. But some of those things have been good. And so in other words, let's not give into critical words, even when somebody has done something that absolutely just makes me livid. Critical words are just a hop, skip, and a jump from the thing that Miriam did. And we see what the result of that was. And Paul says this, and do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. It seems to me that if we don't heed these words, and again, I'm not saying that we haven't. These are words that need to be spoken in advance of what God is doing and will do. Please understand that. But let's also keep in mind that a place where critical words are prevalent grieves the Holy Spirit. And if it grieves his spirit, how long do you think his spirit's going to hang around? And if his spirit isn't here, we might as well shut the doors, turn out the lights, and go home. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God and Messiah forgave you. So these words that we've read are just, they're much more than just words on a paper or a screen in this particular case. This is a code of conduct that is required of us by our master. And it's necessary if there is going to be a thriving, lively congregation and assembly and family. If the zorat that's described for us in the Bible is more than a physical condition, if it's more a spiritual condition that's manifest outwardly, then obviously the remedy is a spiritual one as well. It has to be a change of heart. And only a broken heart and a contrite spirit can create a healing environment. Had no idea that the kids were going to sing certain songs they did today. We never do. But one of the things that I picked up on this morning, the theme of our worship was healing. When Patrick came up and prayed, he prayed for healing for people. I asked him to bless our children, and he did, but he incorporated the idea that there are people out there that need to be healed physically, emotionally, mentally, all these kinds of things. And a contrite heart, a broken spirit, humility, sincerity, these are the things that must be there to create an environment where there can be healing physically, emotionally, wholly. The healing itself, that's only something that God can do. But when our hearts are in accord with His, miraculous things can take place. So if healing is needed in your life or in your family's life or beyond, every one of us have a responsibility to do what's required of us. Because we say this all the time, it's not about me. And it isn't. It's not about you. It's not about us. It's about God's purpose that He has for us, for His family, for this family, for the body. But it's one thing to say it's not about me. It's another thing entirely to act in a way that it expresses it really isn't about me. So lest anyone think that I'm preaching at you, again, I want to make certain you understand that I am sharing with you. I'm sharing with you things that I feel like he is dealing with me about. Let me share some things on kind of a personal level, and I'll start to close with this. I'm going to go a little over today, so just be aware. Sometimes people are placed in positions because of their strengths. Moses was a meek man. We read it earlier. Earlier in Scripture, we see that Moses really didn't want the job. In fact, he was pretty emphatic about it. I don't want this job. Find somebody else. To the point that God had to get a little testy with him. But my point here is, at least this is how I see it, that's one of the main reasons he was given the job. Because he didn't want it. Because it wasn't about building a kingdom for himself. It was about him having to rely on the Father to lead and to guide this mass of people out of bondage into liberty. And his meekness, his humility was a big part of that. That was a strength. And so sometimes we are placed in positions because of our strengths. But I want you to also consider that sometimes we are placed in positions because of our weaknesses. Don't think about that a whole lot, do we? But I want to tag that or tie that to the idea that sometimes our greatest strengths are potentially our greatest weaknesses. Moses was meek, humble. And I read into that maybe kind and considerate. Maybe he wasn't real quick to confront people. I'm not saying he didn't. I'm just saying maybe that wasn't his first instinct. Because he was meek. He was humble. He was a kind person. But it's possible also that kindness was exploited by those who were a little more aggressive. Don't mistake kindness for weakness. Don't mistake mercy for approval. Likewise, don't mistake rebuke for disdain. Don't mistake correction for inconsideration. If he was this kind of man, meek, quiet, perhaps, prefer somebody else do the talking, that was a strength, but potentially could have been a weakness, because maybe that particular characteristic compelled him not to say things sooner than he should. And maybe that's why he struck a rock when he was supposed to speak to it. Maybe that he let things boil up on the inside just a little too long. I don't know, just something to consider. But again, sometimes we're placed in positions because of our strengths, but there are times, and maybe it's both, that he puts us in positions because of our weaknesses. I'll disclose a weakness that I have that has come boiling to the surface in the last 2.5 years. I hate pettiness. It's abhorrent to me. That's not the weakness. That's just the stimulus. The weakness is this, that abhorrence for pettiness, it breeds contempt. And that contempt leads to a desire to just stay away from pettiness and anybody who is the source of it. And then that turns into, I don't like people. Now, am I being too forward with you? I'm just saying, as this is being birthed, unclean things that are unsightly come rising to the surface. And so, some people would say, well, I don't like pettiness either. I think that's a virtue, Bill. Well, fine. You may think that position is a virtue, but God may consider it, depending on your position, to be a weakness. It depends on your function. What somebody would hail as a badge of honor, God may say, that's something we've got to work on. So sometimes we're placed in position because of our weakness. Why was Judas given the purse if Messiah knew that he was a devil and a thief? Now Judas, he presented himself as someone who was very concerned about others. The poor. We could help the poor. That's the way he presented himself. But Messiah knew different than that. He knew what he was from the very beginning. So why did Messiah allow him, knowing that he was a devil, knowing that he was a thief, why did he give him the purse? Was it that he put him in position to fail? Or was it that he placed him in that position because of his weakness? To expose his weakness, perhaps even in the hopes of repentance. Well, it was prophesied this, that, and the other. Yeah, I know. But you're not going to convince me that had that man acknowledged his weakness, humbled himself, and turned to the Messiah, you're not going to convince me that there wouldn't have been a recourse for that man. So again, what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes we are placed in positions because of our weaknesses, not our strength. You may think, I may think, he may think, it's because I'm good at this. Well, what you're good at is potentially what you're bad at, if it's not used in the right way. The squeezing brings our weaknesses to the surface, and then we're given a space of time to address it, deal with it, remove it from our life, overcome our selfishness and self-indulgence. Because if we don't, it could be our undoing. But before it comes to that, that's when the Father is going to step in and say, okay, I give you time now, I'm going to deal with this. And we're going to take care of it quick, fast, and in a hurry. Anyway. All right, I'm going to leave things on a little more positive note, a little more hopeful note. And I'll close with this. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations. Paul had a lot of revelation about something. Paul was a smart guy. Would you agree? Very knowledgeable in the Torah, what Moses wrote, what the prophets wrote. And he had revelations, and he could put things together. And people, I'm sure, were saying, wow, where did you get that? I never saw that before, Paul. Lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me. In other words, God was going to make sure to keep me humble. He was going to keep reminding me this, Paul, this ain't about you. This is about me, my purpose. You're just a vessel, and I chose you for a specific purpose. Now, you function in that purpose, but don't you get so high-minded in thinking that your strengths are all of that, because I'm going to give you something that's going to keep poking you in the side to remind you, I'm the one who did this. I'm the one who put this in you. A thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of the Messiah may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Messiah's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. That should not be taken and interpreted to mean, let's just go fall into being weak people. It's just to say that in our weaknesses, if we allow him to work in and through us, then his strength is going to be made evident in our lives and through our lives. Amen? Father, I pray that your people will hear your word within the words. Those things that need to resound within our spirit, those things that need to take seed in our hearts and lives and minds, I pray that those are the things that you would breathe upon, that you would water, that you would cause to prosper, to grow, and produce its respective fruit in our lives and the life of this congregation. Father, we know that as long as we, your people, though born again, are walking around in these mortal, corruptible bodies, that we will have to contend with our flesh until that day that mortal is made immortal, corruption is made incorruptible. And so, Father, help us, strengthen us, encourage us, challenge us, provoke us each and every day to keep our focal point, to keep our eyes on our King, on our Redeemer, on our Savior, to follow his example, to prefer others before ourselves, and to, as we were admonished, to bear the burdens of one another, to bear one another in our weaknesses, so that the body might thrive and might live and might be fruitful. We know in our hearts that you are birthing something in this assembly. And we know that the adversary won't like what you wish to do. And he will, at every opportunity that is presented him, try to exploit my weakness, the weakness that is represented here by everyone. Father, we pray that by your Spirit you will help us to remain on guard, to remain sober and attentive to the ploys and the devices of our adversary, and to be steadfast in our mission to be proper stewards of what you've entrusted to us. I pray that you will help us to be quick to forgive, slow to wrath, to emulate you in that regard, that we might be a healthy, thriving body, so that when these challenges do present themselves, we will be well equipped, well disciplined, well trained to do what is pleasing in your eyes. These things we commit unto you now in Yeshua's name. Amen.